Schmid has converted to Catholicism. Hi, guys. My name is James. I'm with the Ought Podcast. And as an atheist and as somebody who tries to be open minded and tries to be unbiased and tries to engage thoughtfully and meaningfully with the big question of whether or not God exists, um, I would just say that I've seen so far, as of 8/26/26, the only two videos I'm aware of is his 20 something minute announcement that he's converted to Catholicism and his other video on Pints and Aquinas, where it's about 3.5 hours, where it's a longer, it's not quite his 12 hour, whatever, 10, 12 hour video that's it's come out. But if it's anything like his Pints and Aquinas showing, I don't know if I'm gonna watch his 12 hour, 10 hour super video or not. I'm not sure if it's. I was. So first and foremost, I'm going to invoke my good buddy who's Christian, and I'm going to imagine he's in the room to help me maintain my emotional state. So I was frustrated, but not because my worldview was being pushed or I was really struggling with what he was saying. I was frustrated because I feel like I am witnessing Joe Schmid abandon his philosophical nuance to embrace a hard, dogmatic Catholic Catechism stance. I think that he's already starting to engage in apologetic strawmen. I think that he's being a little arrogant, and I know that these are not kind things, and that I'm coming across as attacking the person and not the ideas. So allow me to give the case for it. So just to remind people with Joe Schmid, if you're not familiar with him, this whole thing's not going to change anything. And but if you are familiar with it, Joe Schmid is a Princeton philosophy major. He's working on his doctorates, and that's incredible. I wish I found philosophy earlier, and I think I just either way. I'm very, he's an impressive young man. He's probably going to know more about philosophy than I'll ever attain, but I'm just going to keep reading and we'll see what happens. you know. Um, Kind of the insulting thing is like I'm not a philosophy major. I've been reading books. I like reading books. When it comes to philosophy, I think that I'm closer to Kant. There's a couple of things that I have uh, in my worldview that I think Kant didn't. But for the most part, uh, Kantian meta ethics for me is incredibly superior to theistic because I told you so. You know, I just find it to be far more effective at helping me be a more ethical man than theism does when it comes specifically to the morality. And so the reason why I'm speaking about morality is because Joe, I felt, made a straw man that I thought was really shocking for a Princeton philosophy degree doctoral student, right? I So what he said was he brought up the kind of the standard apologetic of uh, it is a objective moral truth that uh, torturing babies for fun is wrong. And then he goes, naturalists struggle with this. And I maybe in a very philosophically technical term, like how he's using the word naturalist, maybe he has a point, but there are people that look at things like why it's okay to eat meat, right? Well, I dine on flora and fauna because when I die, flora and fauna will feast on me, right? Does that make that objectively true? But you could say, well, there's a natural truth there. We look at life and we see life consumes life. It's a dog eat dog world out there. So when it comes to morality, consuming animals is okay because those animals would happily consume me. It's a dog eat dog world. I just happen to be the successful predator today. It might be the successful predator tomorrow. You know, in a moral sense, there's no problems. Like if an alligator eats a human being, is there some grand moral travesty that occurred there? If we eat an alligator, is there some grand moral travesty that happens there? I think that we can look at things like, well, how do we know that why are our intuitions that we shouldn't do this to children? We can look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, which I can't think of a more rational or realist, or I'm sorry, naturalistic perspective. I would say, look, the humans that thought torturing their babies for fun often ended up killing their babies. Obviously, they didn't feel a duty of care. Obviously, it would just be a drain on the resources to care for these kids, especially if they thought torturing them was acceptable. So I don't see how that, those humans would survive. Whereas humans that said, do have a moral duty of care to my children. I have to pass on my genes, which seems to be very much one of the prime motivators in nature. Therefore, I think that we could derive moral duties and values by just looking at kind of this naturalistic need to procreate and to pass on our genes. And for humanity, especially, we're looking at, well, we have a duty of care to infants because infants are defenseless. They can't survive without assistance until they grow to a certain age where they're finally capable of survival on their own. We are tribalistic, so the reality is we are not, capable of surviving independently. We can't operate like sharks. We do require other humans in order for us to survive, so we are tribalistic. This, I think, is fairly obvious. I think you think it's fairly obvious. And so I find it odd that when we say, okay, look, okay, I can see a duty of care to children kind of evolving naturalistically. Okay, I see a duty of care, like, okay, now we're treating children within a tribe. This explains a lot of our tribal biases. It gives us a lot of explanatory power, really, when we look at the kind of evolutionary naturalistic process. But maybe I'm using the word naturalism incorrectly. Maybe there's some other philosophical understanding that a PhD, Princeton philosophy major could, has that I'm simply not operating under. Sure, whatever. Okay. But to me, I found this to be like a really offhanded comment, and I really thought, like, and I kind of Googled, like, are there not, people that can handle this that aren't just theistic? And there's plenty of, like, I think Kant can easily explain why cruelty, and I'm hoping that word kind of jars something, like why cruelty is not an acceptable thing to do. We may even say, well, that child's not endowed with anything special, but we could say, well, it's still harmful to ourselves because we're now rationalizing cruelty. We're now saying that cruelty is acceptable and how that affects our processes going forward. I think that's, like I said, pretty robust. So, and I don't need a divine being telling me not to torture babies. It just seems really odd to me that saying naturalists really struggle with this. Now, if you want to say in the grander sense, in a consciousness, naturalists trying to explain how consciousness arises, that's really difficult to explain. I mean, we all have theories. You may not find it objectively satisfying, but that doesn't mean that those theories cease to exist. I myself think that all our minds are is just emotivism is the core with, a language overlay. And that's our rational selves, but we are primarily an emotional state, and our language overlay is simply trying to parse out those emotions for us, and that's all that's really going on. I'm sure Alex O'Connor, as an emotivist, would probably have a better job explaining that, but I don't think, like, when we understand, like, evolution and why do we feel the things that we feel, I think that a lot of it does, make sense in a naturalistic worldview. I just found it a little surprising, but you know what? I think it's okay that you find fine-tuning morality and oh shoot, my brain just went dead. Fine-tuning morality and the rise of consciousness in a fine-tuning universe. It's just not real. I can't bring myself to objectively find it satisfying, where God does, or at least the divine making, like, the grand plan. Okay, fine. it's fine that that is compelling, but I found it to be insulting that it resulted into a little bit of a straw man there and tried to act like just, no one can. It made me immediately think of atheists can't answer this question. And, just a little while ago, you would have been like, I hate it when I see these atheists can't this or atheists can't that, and it's some moral quandary. There's plenty of people working on this stuff, and there's plenty of people that have written on it, and there are plenty of people that will write on it. And I find it extremely dishonest for somebody who I know knows better to make that kind of offhanded comment. But it's a podcast, and even though you're extremely familiar with it, you could just be extremely nervous because you were so hostile to the church, and now you're back, and maybe you're just kind of fish out of the watering, and maybe that was just a moment for you, and okay. But I do think you need to be more careful in the future. And I would highly recommend say whatever you want to say, but try to be humble. And Anyway, moving on to the grand poobah of the issue. Succinctly, can you honestly say, let's just take a moment to be self-aware. Let's just be self-aware. You are a Princeton philosophy major going for his doctorates in that field. Are you sure, genuinely, that you have the tools to verify these miraculous claims and to truly determine if they are 100% legitimate? Do you genuinely think you have those tools? Like, honestly, I know your one friend was bugging you like, hey man, what's your response? I just want to hear your response. Because here's how I see it. Let's pretend you have never seen a magic show. You've never seen any kind of sleight of hand. You've never read anything that said to make you suspicious that it may not be real. No knowledge of it. And your buddy shows up and says, I am with the Circle of Magi, and I'm really interested in getting you to join me. You say, well, how do I join you? He says, well, you got to believe magic is real. And you say, well, I've never heard of this magic. I've never seen magic. I'm just, so you know, inherently skeptical. Okay. I'm going to take you to a magic show, and it will change your mind. And you say, okay. And you go to a magic show, and there, a magician up there is breathing fire. You've never seen a human do this, and you can't figure out how he does it. And you're like, well, it's just one thing. Okay. And then he does a card trick. You go up there and you pick your card. It's the ace of spades. And he says, lose it. And you shove it somewhere in the deck. Is this your card? It's the ace of spades. Blows your mind. But you think, well, that's just a 2% chance. And he says, oh, just a 2% chance. Okay. Boom, ace of spades again. And you're just like, okay, what are the odds of 2% of 2%, right? And he goes, oh, I got you again, fam. Shh, ace of spades. Shh, ace of spades. He does it 100 times. What are the odds of that? Astronomical. You can't even fathom how big that number is. It's magic, right? You go back, you've just witnessed 100 repeated examples of magic. You just saw him breathe fire, and now he's making things appear and disappear. You don't understand how it's happening. He's able to get birds to bend to his will, and you just, again, you're just like, how is he doing this? And you leave with your buddy, and you have watched miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. You have no ability whatsoever. You all looked on the up and up. You have no ability because you're a layman. You don't know anything about magic, right? You go out and you're like, holy cow. You're right. Or maybe you're still skeptical and you're like, I'm going to go home and think on this. You go home and you're just like, right? Mind totally blown. You can't resolve it. And your buddy is every day, you believe in magic, ready to join the Circle of Magi. And finally, you're just like, I had all these objections to magic, but I've witnessed it. I know it's real. I've seen it. You join the circle of magi. And then Penn and Teller shows up and says, "That's really weird. You know it's all tricks, right?" And you say, "Nah, man, I've seen it. It's magic." "Oh, this show? Yeah, we know how he breathes fire. We can actually imitate it right here. And we'll even show you step by step how the trick works." "Oh, he produced the Ace of Spades, man, it's just a shuffling trick. This is a well-known shuffle in the Magic community. You can make the same card appear every single time." "Hey, did you inspect the cards? There's another way you could do it. Every card's the Ace of Spades." There's a certain way of like, shuffle the card. As long as I know what the bottom card is and I've got mirrors on my ring, I can just look at it. I can do this stuff. You don't have any of this knowledge. You don't know. And he's literally debunking all of these things that you took as miracles as pure evidence of magic. And you're now going, okay, yeah, you know what? You're right. Now, here's the question, Joe. What are you going to do when that happens? If that happens, what are you going to do if somebody comes along and debunks it? So you have one of two pivots, right? Maybe this is a false dichotomy, but let's just say it's one of two pivots. Pivot one, double down. Well, and you invent more magical stuff. Like, well, there's demons, and demons don't want us to know God exists, so they're out there erasing stuff. Okay. The men in black exist. They're flashy thinging people, so they forget. The only reliable news source, tabloids. That's another possibility, right? So that's one thing. Or you realize I didn't have the tools at the time to look at that evidence and really objectively know for a fact what I was seeing was actually real, or it was something that was manufactured to convince me something was real. Now, again, this gets into the grand conspiracy. Well, James, the reason I don't believe that is because that would require a grand conspiracy. I've got a couple of things to say about that. One, what would the conspiracy be of keeping the truth contained? Arguably, we could say miracles happen around the world. They've happened throughout time. As long as humans have been around, Jesus, God, the Holy Ghost, whatever, or any combination of it, has been interacting with humanity. For whatever reason, it seems to be ultimately rare, very rare for some reason. Obviously, we're going to have to rely on probably some kind of free will defense, to maintain that. But are we already starting to see kind of a problem? Like, well, we need to reinvoke the free will defense. I have to invent angels and demons to explain why this data is, not around. Isn't it just coincidental that, this is deeply private and deeply personal and we can't bring a camera in, so that's why we don't have evidence? And that's super compelling, and that's just super duper compelling, right? And I get it, like saying, sure, that sounds rational, but the issue is that if you're going to convince me on this evidence, and you're going to rationalize why all the weaknesses don't exist, well, it's deeply personal, it's humiliating. Demons are destroying the rest, and so we just kind of get these little shards, and it must be true. That's a problem. I think there's another problem. We sit here and we're saying it's either a global conspiracy or they're telling the truth. I think a lot of these people are telling the truth in their worldview. I believe they believe. You know what I mean? And I know you know what that means. I know you know what that means. So I believe they believe. Let's talk about some armchair, we don't have to go anywhere ideas that kind of gets us to a place where we should be at least a little skeptical. Remember, we both acknowledge neither one of us has the tools to look at every evidence and say, I can solve this mystery. We can look up at the clouds and you could say, I see an angel, and I look up and I go, oh, I see the angel, right? That's its wings, right? And we kind of do that kind of cloud checky thing, right? And while we're talking about it, somebody overhears that you saw an angel and they look up and they see an angel and they say, oh, wow, it really is an angel. And a bunch of people look up and everybody's starting to get really blown away. So it looks like an angel. It must be a sign. How do you disprove this, right? But what do we know about clouds? One, there's tons and tons of them. Two, they're amorphous. They're, three, humans project, anthropomorphic projections onto things. We see patterns in things that do not have patterns. Clouds do not have patterns. But we will look up at clouds and say, oh, I see a bunny rabbit. Oh, I see a rhino. But a lot of times what's interesting is we put an idea of what we see up there, and then somebody looks to confirm that that's the thing. And so they're looking for that same pattern. So when your brain looked up there and saw a pattern, another brain could look up there and see a pattern. And then another brain could look up there seeing a pattern. But they're all seeing the pattern that they want to see because your pattern said it, and now their brains are looking for that pattern in an amorphous cloud. So I'm not saying that this is proof about all these evidences. In fact, it may not even be a single claim that's up there. But what it gets to is that you can have lots of people, they're not lying, they all genuinely believe what they're saying on something that is objectively amorphous. It's not an angel. It's not in the shape of an angel. It's a cloud. And even if it was somehow in a shape of a cloud, how many clouds are up there? And how many of them, and we all know they take all sorts of shapes and sizes and all sorts of things. Just statistically, how often are we going to kind of be like, it kind of looks like you know what I mean? Like, immediately tells you something. When we talk about like Fatima, right, and the sun dancing. So there's a medical phenomenon. When you just stare at the sun long enough, it will start to dance, right? You shouldn't stare at the sun. It will damage your eyes. But if you do, it will start to do that. Interestingly enough, no one else saw it, right? There's no scientific apparatus that identified that the sun was doing something funny and weird. Nothing. We just had a bunch of people staring at the sky so long that they started to see some really funny stuff. And we see things. We've seen all sorts of weird things. People like with the dancing disease. What's going on with that? All these people were dancing. Their feet were hurting. They were in a lot of agony, and yet they kept having to dance. What's going on? That must be possessed by demons, right? Like, there's weird stuff that has happened that we as lay people have no knowledge of. We have UFO sightings on military fighter jets. Incredible technology. Look at how precise this stuff. We can land a warhead on a fly's butt 200 miles away or whatever. Incredible. Their instruments are showing them something impossible. Something is moving so fast you couldn't explain it at altitudes that are unheard of. And they're just trying. They're like, I'm trying to stay ahead of it. It's gone. I don't believe it. What was that? It must have been aliens, right? We recently saw a whole spat of UFO sightings that the government had. Notice how you speak a lot about government documents. And the government had experts go through it, and they explained the math of how they know this thing was just a weather balloon and how, compared to the water, compared to the sky, and they start showing all this stuff. And again, this gets back to the fact that you can have very smart people convinced of things that is rational for them to conclude that way, but ultimately was misinterpreted, or the evidence was, or the devices taking the measurement were wrong, or this or that, and they come to these conclusions, and we say, oh, okay, this is within tolerance. Okay, so this actually isn't something supernatural. It's just kind of it's just an oddity that happened with the instrumentation on a special night. Yep. And the fact is, I think that I think that's really what it just comes down to. And I don't want to belabor the point. I think that, we lack the tools to look at X-rays and discern anything from them, other than looks like an X-ray, especially when we're looking at oddities. We don't know the full chain of custody. We're taking the testimonies of one guy and we're saying to ourselves, well, he's a Princeton doctor. He has no reason to lie. So, why would he make this stuff up? And, I don't know. I'm not sure. I believe he believes until he proves to me otherwise, But, some things, I don't know. I can't explain, And to sit here and say, well, obviously you should believe then because these are all Catholics. And I'm like, buddy, there's weird stuff that happens everywhere all the time in all denominations. Everybody has their miracle claims. Everybody has their miracle evidences. And you discount all of them but Catholics suddenly. Or you're going to have to rely on demons or, God's just, I guess, playing a trick on the other ones. Those Hindus think that Shiva's real. Watch this. This will really blow their mind. Why? Well, God is a great comic jester. Those poor guys are going to not be laughing for the rest of eternity, right? But I just felt like I don't know, man. I would recommend you pump the brakes, finish your doctorate, and pump the brakes. And really, while you're in Princeton, see if you can find some medical doctors, or talk to some professors, and and just say, I really don't understand. If this is true, we should all be like completely convinced, right? I don't know, man. Like, talk to some people and really try to see what's going on there. And I would honestly say, look, man, you know that relying on demons to explain away why evidence is poor is extraordinarily weak. It's just an unverifiable added supernatural thing, that only comes with other problems like, well, why aren't the angels intervening, or why isn't God intervening? And, it immediately just adds another question, right? It doesn't solve anything. It just makes things even crazier. I think you know that. I don't think you're dumb. I know you know these things. So, um, man, I think really you should pump the brakes. I really think this really wasn't exciting or inspirational, or I really just kind of walked away thinking, that you became convinced by the Dawson, or the tons of miracle claims. You don't have the tools to verify the veracity of them. You became convinced, and it basically, you just brute accept the Catechism, because these were Catholic miracles, and that proves Catholicism, and that, like I said, that just led you to the brute. Like I said, to me, it makes a causal chain sense, but I think that that's really the most powerful thing that happened for you, because the way it fundamentally shifted your philosophies, and it is seemingly overnight, or at least within this year, so within the past 7 months, and this is a major change. I don't know, man. Finish your doctorate, pump the brakes. That would be my recommendation. But obviously, say whatever you want. But I wasn't impressed. All right, thank you. Have a good night. And of course, if you have any comments, concerns, questions, hit me up in the chat. If I was disrespectful, rude, or whatever, holla at me and let me know what, uh, and I'll try to do better. Take it down, make a new one or something. Either way. All right, guys.